Hi folks, Tim Newman with Soft Lite Studios, and it's Tuesday. And if you've been following Soft Lite Studios, you know that Tuesday is Composition Day, seeing and being seen. In today's composition topic, we are going to talk about bad weather, which is ironic when you consider I live in Columbus, Ohio, the capital of bad weather this spring. At any rate, was recently on a trip to Washington, D.C., doing some shooting there, and I was at the Supreme Court building later in the afternoon, getting closer to that golden hour time of day, and there were a few people milling around taking some pictures, and the skies opened up and it started to sprinkle, and everybody scattered. I think they were afraid they were going to melt, but they all left. And what I recognized as I was standing there, and I recognized in past opportunities like this, is that rain was going to give me some really cool reflections. So we went up on the steps, kind of milled around in the columns and took some pictures up there and waited for the rain to slow up a little bit and get a nice, even, wet coating on the marble in front of the Supreme Court building. And we got some fantastic reflection shots out of it. Not the complete reflections of the building kind of shots, but something that adds really what I think is some extra depth in the picture. Now we'll take a look at those in a minute, but what I want you to think about when you're out is don't duck and hide from the weather. Don't drown your camera gear, obviously. Easy enough to stop and get a shopping bag from somewhere if you have to, or grab a trash bag. But keep your gear dry, try to keep yourself dry, and look for those opportunities where the weather really adds to the scene. Let's take a look at a couple of these shots. Okay, so let's take a look at some images that were captured from the day in question in our introduction where the weather turned on us a little bit. Now, I will admit that this image here, I went back the following morning to grab this one before it got too late in the morning and people started to crowd the steps there at the Supreme Court. I like the isolation of this picture. I feel like the leading lines in the picture, the symmetry, the geometric balance, the tonal balance, they all work pretty well here. And I want you to keep that in mind, because when you see an image about 3 or 4 images from now, I want you to kind of contrast that in your head back to this one. And I think you'll really immediately see what I'm talking about. Now, this next picture was from the actual day in question. This was literally moments before the rain started. You could see the weather kind of moving in, and people were starting to kind of head off down the road because I think they knew that the rain was coming. There were actually a couple people up in between the columns there on the portico, but they were nicely tucked in behind the columns, so quickly grabbed this shot when I had the chance. And it wasn't too long after that that the rain started, and that's when we elected to go up on the portico and spend some time kind of wandering around between the marble columns and looking at some of the architectural details up here. And this shot really kind of struck me in terms of the way it's divided up into pretty close to thirds. It's got natural leading lines in it, and I think the texture in the columns works really well, and I think there's really good symmetry on the left and right sides in the column. So I was real happy with that one. But we were basically staying out of the rain and kind of watching. And as it unfolded, this shot became obvious to me. And it was that the marble was all wet. And you can see that when the marble is wet, 2 things happen. One is the texture becomes more obvious. It begins to pop out in the picture, and the colors become a little bit deeper. They take on that little bit of moisture and shine, and they really shine colors back at you very nicely. And I couldn't help but look at this picture and think that I really liked the way the composition came together in this picture. In fact, it reminds me a little bit of that scene in Ghostbusters where they're on the roof of the building and they're looking up across the floor, up into the stairs, into the lair of Zool, or whoever that mythical creature was in the movie. So I don't know, that might be a potential future title for this image. And then this is the shot that really struck me. Of course, there's some lights on inside the building, and there's some really nice reflections of the storm in the windows. But the thing that really anchors the image for me is the reflection on the marble. You can see the columns reflecting in the marble, and while it's not immediately identifiable what they are, it adds to the depth of the image. It gives you more detail for your eye to look at and inspect. And you might remember back to the first image, I said you'll see an immediate comparison between the two, that this one I think has a whole lot more depth than the first image did. I also left the guard in this picture, which I think provides a couple of things. You know, we talk about in symmetry and patterns, we're looking for the break in the symmetry and the patterns. The guard over there next to this post is clearly the break in the symmetry here in this picture, which I think is a nice touch. Plus, it provides an excellent sense of scale. You all of a sudden really begin to understand how big the edifice of this building is and how big those columns are, which I think is really nice. And then last but least is our last picture here. And again, tightening up the frame. I think a lot of people look at the Supreme Court building and think, wow, that's a landscape image. It's a nice wide building. You know, let's work that width. I agree that's definitely one of the ways to work it, but I'm always looking for the counterbalance to what's obvious in the picture. And this one here really struck out to me. It really stuck out in my mind. I thought, wow, the combination of the reflection in the marble in the front of the building, and then the marble columns, those all kind of connected together, make this thing look really tall, which I think lends itself really well here in this portrait-oriented image. So there you go. Those kind of give you a comparison of what we got without the rain and what we got with the rain. And I think you'd have to agree, at least I hope you agree, that with the rain really adds additional texture, character, and depth to the images. So I'll have a couple of thoughts to wrap up, and then we'll call it a wrap on this one. See you on the other side. Well, there you go, folks. Some images for us to consider from what we would have considered a bad weather day, but I don't think bad weather days are necessarily bad. I think they can turn out good. I'm always looking for the results of bad weather, whether it be that layer of moisture on the road or on the ground or on the marble, as it was in these pictures that we just saw here, those clouds in the sky from a storm rolling in that give us additional texture and contrast and really do great things with the light in the foreground. In fact, if I'm out shooting waterfalls or rivers in forested areas and I'm going to think about working on long exposure images, which I do quite often, I really would much rather have an overcast, misty day than a bright sunny day. It really cuts off those specular highlights that create such a problem in those exposures, and it works out really, really well. It's kind of like your own built-in multi-stop diffuser over the sky, so that's a great thing. Hope that this information was helpful for you. Tuck that away in the back of your head, take it out with you in your next shoot. By the way, in your next shoot, throw a nice garbage bag in your camera bag with you so you can throw it over the top of your gear. One of the best shots I ever got was out at the Grand Canyon in an absolute monsoon downpour. I took off my rain jacket, wrapped it over the camera, set it up on the tripod, and got out of the rain for a little bit. But the minute the sky cleared, my camera was ready. I ripped the coat off, hit the cable release, bang, 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 got the shots, and then literally 30 seconds later, that moment with those reflected rays coming back up out of the steam and the cloud layer at the bottom of the canyon were gone. And you were either ready and got it, or you weren't ready and you didn't. So keep that in mind. Hit that subscribe button down there so you get more information about new videos that we're bringing out on a daily basis. We thank you for tuning in. And remember, as we always say, learning equals skills. Practice equals mastery. We'll see you out there.
Thank you.